Hi, I'm P.Carrow, and today I'm going to be walking through a discussion focusing on the article titled Extending Advice Response Theory to the Advisor: Similarities, Differences, and Partner Effects in Advisor and Recipient Advice Evaluations. When I first read the title of this article, I was already overwhelmed. Hopefully, by the end of this, we feel like we comprehend the material a little bit more and understand the powerful impact that this article can have on our daily lives. While I was reading through the article, I kept reflecting and remembering moments where I personally had situations where I was provided advice as a recipient from someone of authority, whether that was a coach, a teacher, or a boss, or even my parents sometimes. I remember asking for advice and then somehow being more confused and frustrated than before. Well, while I kept thinking of those frustrating moments, I read through the article and realized that I was identifying and classifying these as moments where I had bad advice because they lacked the qualities of good advice. This article helped me better understand the components that contributed to making quality advice versus the not so quality advice I've received in the past. So the first step on my research of this was, of course, to look up what's the worst advice someone has received in the past. I stumbled upon thousands of interesting articles, but the part that felt most interesting to me was the segment that Jimmy Fallon did on one of his late night shows. He sent out a tweet asking for what's the hashtag worst advice you've ever received. And while the two tweets on the top have humor and made me chuckle, the bottom tweet really resonated with me and made me think the power of advice that we give. Author Adam Grant responded to this by saying the worst advice he ever received was don't waste time helping others. Drop 90% of your projects because you can only do one at a time. And don't write a book. Luckily, Adam was able to identify this as advice that was not quality and that went against maybe his morals or his dreams and wants. So we've seen negative advice. We know how to usually identify this, but what does good advice look like? Using media, we're able to look at three popular figures. First, the ever-wise Yoda, who tells us, try not, do or do not, there is no try. The buff and semi-handsome Rocky Balboa, who tries to lift us up and make us believe in ourselves, because until you start believing in yourself, you ain't gonna have a life. And finally, in the popular artist of Lizzo, who empowers women through her music and lyrics that remind women not to be held back in relationships, that they deserve to be independent and valued. We see quality advice in social media and through pop culture often, but what is it that makes this advice quality? To quickly summarize and dive into this, when we look at the article, I think it's important that we are examining the role of the advisor, so the person giving the advice to a recipient. The authors also utilize the advised response theory and control level theory as frameworks that helped us identify the factors of quality advice. They discuss politeness, feasibility, absence of limitations, their expertise, the advisor's expertise, the empathy shared, and the positive relationships and the effects that have in producing quality advice. The study was focused on 130 college-age students who first participated in a survey and then participated in a discussion that was focused around the stressors indicated in the survey. The authors used Tracy's 2013 qualitative research approach that evaluated those discussions and used open coding to identify the repeating themes and ideas found within those discussions. Some of those ideas and the components that were identified to help with quality advice consisted of positive face work, which reiterates this idea of being polite and kind within our delivery of advice. The feasibility of the advice. Is the advisor giving something that seems like it's a tangible goal, which also complements this idea that quality advice should have an absence of limitations, meaning we should be able to go out and achieve our goals using the advice given as a guideline. Does our advisor have a high construal level? Meaning, are we able to understand how people perceive and comprehend, interpret the world around us and how we fit into that world? In addition to the expertise of the advisor, do they know about the advice they're giving, or are they just saying what they think? And finally, is there a positive relationship shared between the advisor and the recipient? All of these components help contribute to a piece of quality advice that is shared between both the advisor and the recipient. Refocusing back on the study, the second figure in the article shows us the different roles between the top, which is the recipient, and how they identify quality advice, and the bottom, which is the advisor, and the qualifications that make advice quality in their point of view. So while there are differences, these aren't replicas. That's because this article focuses on expanding the art theory and looking at the advisor's role specifically. So let's take these components and apply them to one of the examples provided earlier. Since he's the cutest one of the bunch, I picked Yoda to kind of dive into and see how his advice qualifies as quality. So in his conversation with one of his mentees, Luke, he uses his positive relationship to positively talk and engage with him using empathy and understanding of Luke's situation and the world around both of them. He is obviously an expert in his subject as he serves as a master of the knowledge and wisdom that we know Yoda has shown through many films. Finally, this is feasible and absent of limitations because due to the scenario and the setting of the film, we know that Yoda is inspiring and giving advice to Luke, who can go out there and really achieve anything he sets his mind to. He knows that there's no try in there. He's going to do it. And he inspires and empowers Luke with his quality advice. So why should you care? You might not think you're the next Luke or maybe the next Yoda, but this is still very applicable to our everyday lives. This article helps us understand first our role as a professional. Many of us go into the workplace and we are seen as experts in our field. We might be asked advice on a daily basis. So when we're providing advice, we want to make sure that it makes sense to our recipients and that it is quality. We want to be constructive and understand the power that our expertise holds and when we are delivering advice. Second, as students, we are sometimes on the recipient end of asking for advice. And as researchers, we need to be able to understand and identify the components that make that advice quality or not. We use that thought process also in our personal relationships. Whether married, dating, a mother, or even a friend, we are asked for advice very often. In those personal relationships, our advice should be handled in a delicate manner. Our words matter, and how we advise those that are close to us on a personal level can really impact, either positively or negatively, the relationship shared with the individual. We want to make sure, as advisors in advice, we are doing our best to give quality material. And while we think of doing our best, we think of the strengths and the limitations that are found within the article. I thought that the article did a really nice job of expanding the art theory to the role of the advisor, which gave us a more comprehensive and cohesive look of how both roles of the advisor and the recipient play within these interactions. I also really enjoyed how applicable each of the qualifications for quality advice felt, and I could use those components to evaluate previous advice I've received. When looking at the study itself, some limitations that I found were the lack of diversity in the participants. Majority of the participants were of the same age, and they had the same social economic background as well as the racial makeup. There seemed also to be a lack of development in the why versus the how, but that could be due that the participants had knowledge of the context of the research. They were aware that they were going to be receiving advice, and that's what they were going to be studied on, which could have altered some of their more natural responses. So while we look at the strengths and maybe some of those limitations, we review how this applies to our everyday life. We want to remember that the key takeaway here is quality advice relies on the structure, the relationship, the delivery, and a shared comprehension. Our goal when we're in as an advisor is usually to help. We want to make sure that we are encouraging and sharing empathy and really being mindful of our power as communicators. This article, I think, does a great job of identifying and helping us really apply this to our everyday lives. So I'll leave you with one of my favorite quotes by Cicero, which is, "Advice is judged by results, not by intentions." Are we giving advice that is meaningful and high quality, that will produce results that are desired by our recipient? Or are we just intending to give quality advice, but we're not sure how to do it? Luckily, this article gives us a great breakdown of the how-tos and the important components that make advice quality. Thank you guys so much for discussing this with me, and I look forward to continuing our discussions on Now Comment. Thanks, guys.